do a real study. The study issued in December of '09, warning again that within 3 to 4 years, extraction of conventional oil would plateau and begin a steady decline. This, he said, is not good news. Y'all read WikiLeaks? It's amusing reading. Apparently, diplomatic cables intercepted show that the Saudis have been cooking their books as well. They've got 40% less capacity than we'd believed. And this spring, oil hit 120 a barrel. The Economist warned that if Algeria falls to the unrest, it could hit 200 barrel, and if we lose the Libyan fields, 250 a barrel. What's that about a recovery? If you want to get off oil, there's really only one way to do it, and that is rethink the transportation system. Happily, there are a lot of ways to do it. The Air Force has been flying F-15s on jet fuel from the lipid algae, the algae that have oil in them. In Copenhagen and Amsterdam, tens of thousands of people commute every day on bicycles. You can make bus systems work like rapid transit, which they've done in Curitiba in Bogota. Or we can have real high-speed rail. The Chinese have 30,000 kilometers of route of high-speed rail under construction. How many in this country? Well, we were going to build one from Tampa to Orlando. I guess we all needed to get to Disney World faster. But that went, by the way, in the budget hearings. Richard Branson said he's putting the profits of the Virgin Group for the next 10 years into non-carbon fuel. And I was there at the time. The media came running up and said, why? He said, look, I run an airline. We live in a carbon-constrained world. I'm going to need fuel. I said, and he's going to make a boatload of money. You can home make biodiesel, or you can do it industrially. It's really important, though, that you source the feedstocks sustainably. If we load the energy world onto an existing unsustainable agricultural system, we're going to create a real mess. How about we try different business models? Shai Agassi, young man who was in line to be the CEO of SAP, has this crazy idea. He's going to sell you an electric car just the way you buy a phone at a concessionary rate, because the phone company is going to sell you the service of running that phone. He's going to sell you the service of swapping out your battery with a renewably powered battery recharging station at the same amount of time and the same price point that you now pay to put petrol in your car. Daft, huh? He's doing it. Renault and Danish Oil and Natural Gas have done a deal with Better Place to start building electric cars and charging them in Denmark. And taxicabs in San Francisco. The Europeans are innovating. Danish Oil and Natural Gas and Siemens, the German industrial conglomerate, are building big offshore wind off the coast of North Germany, Denmark. Folk are doing big wave off Scotland. Scotland reckons to be 100% renewable by 2020. Wave off Portugal. Solar across the south of Europe. Biofuels. Distributed generation everywhere, hooked together with a smart grid, smart homes, smart cars. The batteries in the cars can be storage for the intermittent sources. Europe reckons to be 100% renewable by 2050. They going to do it? I don't know, but this kind of innovation is going to drive their economy. Well, there's some folk in this country doing it as well. This is Google, the Google parking lot. You drive your car, park it in the shade of the solar panels, pull down a little charger, and charge your car while you're at work. Or in a network of electric charging stations up and down the California coast. Vauban, Germany, car-free. People sell their cars to move there, because you can own a car, but you're going to pay $40,000 to garage it on the edge of town, which is the same garage in which the car share program exists. So why own a car? People are moving there for the quality of life, because you can raise children with no risk of getting squashed. Now, the title Climate Capitalism begs the question, isn't capitalism what got us into this mess? Perhaps. No doubt we're in a mess. I believe, and am joined by John Porritt and Sir John Beddington, Chief Scientist of the UK, that the fundamental unsustainability of the way in which we do business is what drove the financial collapse. And that if we don't deal with this unsustainability, we're going to lurch from collapse to collapse to collapse. Prior to the 2008 collapse, this country was borrowing $2 billion a day from the Chinese and the sovereign wealth funds of the Middle East to buy imported oil from the sovereign wealth funds of the Middle East in competition with the Chinese. We know what unsustainability looks like. It's the Russian fires. It's the Pakistani floods. 20 million people displaced in a country with nuclear-tipped missiles. There remains a very important role for government. To say that the market will do it all is a bit like a bad light bulb joke. How many economists does it take to screw in a light bulb? None. The free market will do it. Markets are a marvelous servant. They're not such a good master. They're a terrible religion. And there's a very important role for communities of faith, for creation stewardship, for asking and answering the question of why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Go back and read Adam Smith, father of free markets. Any of you know, by the way, what chair Smith held at the University of Glasgow? Was he an economist? He was a moral philosopher. And the book he was writing when he died was called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It reads very different than what the neocons would have you believe Adam Smith says. Just think about it, the wealth of nations. It wasn't the wealth of individuals or greedy individuals. Smith believed that nations competed in this free market in order to get enough wealth to be able to maintain a sufficient military to keep themselves from being taken over by bad guys. In the book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he talked about what is the meaning of life and what is it to live a good life. And the essence of it, he said, is to be loved. Smith was very clear. Markets allocate scarce resources efficiently in the short term. They were never intended to take care of grandchildren. That's our job. That's the job of a free people coming together in a democracy and saying, what kind of a future do we want? The trouble is, time is very short. Then a miracle occurs. I think you need to be a little more explicit here in step 2. This was the poster in the Copenhagen airport when the world came together a year and a half ago to put in place a successor to the Kyoto Protocol and failed. Boyd and I were down in Cancun when the world came together again and failed. We're running out of time. Read at least the executive summary of the Global Biodiversity Outlook 3. It's sobering. We're losing every major ecosystem on the planet. 3 of them are tipping into collapse. Coral reefs. Sorry, scuba divers. The Amazon. This is a bit more serious. And the acidification of the oceans. This could be tilt game over. This could be the end of life as we know it on Earth. And I highly, highly recommend you come hear Dr. Tim Flannery, eminent Australian scientist. My friend Bill Becker, who ran the Presidential Climate Action Project, said if we insist on ruining the planet, we're going to have to stop claiming we're a superior species. Nature creates conditions conducive to life. Here's what we do. These are the synthetic compounds now found in mother's milk. And for those of you who are fans of breastfeeding, all other forms of milk, aldehydes, ketones, phenols, furfural. People, what are we doing to ourselves? It's worth answering that question. Nature runs a rigorous testing laboratory in which products that don't work get recalled by the manufacturer. This is a cautionary tale for a young species like ours. So we asked nature, what do you think? How are we doing? My friend, the business leader Ray Anderson, put it a bit more simply. What's the business case for ending life on Earth? We have all the technologies that we need to solve all the problems facing us. Sure, research is great, and bringing more technologies to market is great, but we know how to solve these problems, and to do so at an enormous profit. We know how to feed all the people on the planet, and how to meet our energy needs, our resource needs. And remember Germany. Doing this will unleash prosperity. Which is why those wild-eyed environmentalists at Goldman Sachs have pointed out that the companies that are the leaders in environment, social, and good governance policy have 25% higher stock value than their less sustainable competitors. Economist Intelligence Unit, these same companies have the highest share price growth over the past 3 years. A.T. Kearney, the sustainability-focused companies, even in the economic downturn, outperformed industry peers, had market capitalization averaging $650 million more than their less sustainable competitors. This is what we call the sustainability imperative. It doesn't even matter if you're being a hypocrite. Hypocrisy is the first step to real change. GE, in 2005, announced Eco-Imagination. All they did was badge as green products they were already making. 2 years later, the sales of their green products had doubled with healthy back orders. They set out to cut their carbon emissions 1% by 2012. By 2007, they'd cut it 4%. Last year, they'd cut it 22%. And Immelt, in his letter to shareholders, said if Eco-Imagination were a separate company, it would be a Fortune 130 with revenue growth twice that of the rest of the company. We need to change our whole mental model of how we do business. Boyd and I teach a discipline that didn't exist when I went to college. And it's why I'm honored to be a professor at Bainbridge, where we're reinventing the conversation about what does it mean to be in business. Because business is the institution that has the management, the wealth, the capacity to take on these challenges. Bucky Fuller said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. Change is hard. Margaret Mead said the only person who likes change is a wet baby. And I'd argue the baby squalls all the way through the process. Think about the caterpillar. When this little critter enters the chrysalis, it has no earthly idea what's fixing to happen to it. You ever broken one of these things apart? There's no worm in there. There's no butterfly in there. It's just goo. And maybe that's where we are now. If it feels like, then slowly the creature starts to emerge, shakily at first. But this is our opportunity. We can build resilience. We can build an increased quality of life and prosperity for all. Let's fly. Thank you.
You know, I'm going to start with, very often people still talk about this dynamic. Well, environmentalists say this, business says that, and just keep that dynamic going. And then even the ones who are viewing that there